They say the moment you bring life into the world should be the happiest day of your life. But what if, in that same moment, you discover the person you love most is living a life you never knew existed? It was 2:17 a.m. when I woke up to a sharp, twisting pain in my lower belly. At first I thought it was just another false alarm. I was only 36 weeks pregnant, and my doctor had warned me about Braxton Hicks contractions. But this was different. Stronger, deeper, and coming in waves that stole my breath. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, the screen lighting up my empty bedroom. My husband Daniel wasn't home. He'd left earlier in the evening, saying he had to catch up with some work buddies. That was 4 hours ago. I pressed his name on my phone. 1 ring. 2. Straight to voicemail. My voice cracked as I left a message. Dan, it's happening. Please come home. I need you. Another contraction hit, sharper than the last. My hands trembled as I tried again, but the call went unanswered. The house felt too quiet, the ticking of the clock on the wall almost mocking me. I thought about calling my mom, but she lived 2 states away. The nearest hospital was a 20-minute drive, and I didn't trust myself behind the wheel. I needed Daniel. He promised he'd be there when the baby came. He swore nothing could keep him away. Another 30 minutes passed. I texted him. Then I called again. Nothing. My heart pounded, not just from the pain, but from a creeping fear I didn't want to name. I tried to steady my breathing. I reminded myself that maybe his phone had died, maybe he was driving, maybe there was a reason. But the little voice in my head, the one I'd been ignoring for months, whispered something darker. It wasn't the first time he'd been busy. In the last year, there had been late nights, unexplained trips, a change in his cologne. But I'd brushed it all aside. I told myself I was just being hormonal, paranoid. Now in the middle of the night, with our baby threatening to arrive early, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The contractions came closer now, 7 minutes apart. I winced, clutching the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed, my heart leapt. But it wasn't Daniel. It was a number I didn't recognize. The message was short, just 1 line. He's not where he says he is. I froze, staring at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my pulse roaring in my ears. Whoever sent this knew something. I typed back, "Who is this? Where is he?" Seconds later, another message. "Check the Westbrook Hotel. Room 512. The pain in my belly was nothing compared to the pain in my chest. I wanted to scream, to cry, but another contraction tore through me, forcing me to double over. The baby was coming, and my husband was... where? I grabbed my coat, my hospital bag, and my phone. But instead of heading straight to the hospital, my car pointed toward the Westbrook Hotel. The drive to the Westbrook Hotel felt unreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Every bump in the road sent another jolt of pain through my belly, and the contractions were now just 6 minutes apart. I kept telling myself I was insane. No pregnant woman in labor should be driving to confront her husband. But my foot stayed on the gas. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know. When I pulled into the parking lot, the neon Westbrook Hotel sign flickered in the damp night air. The place wasn't fancy, just a mid-range hotel off the interstate, but seeing it made my stomach twist even harder. I stumbled into the lobby, clutching my belly. The night clerk gave me a startled look. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just visiting a friend, room 512. He hesitated, probably debating whether to call an ambulance, but finally nodded toward the elevators. I pressed the button, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Each second in that elevator felt like a lifetime. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the hallway smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and stale air. I counted the numbers until I stood in front of 512. My hands shook as I knocked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard muffled voices, the sound of movement. The door opened just a crack, and there he was, Daniel, shirtless, his hair messy in a way that didn't come from sleep. "Emma?" His eyes widened in shock. My voice was ice. "Who's in there?" He stepped into the doorway, trying to block my view, but it was too late. Over his shoulder, I saw her. A young brunette, barely dressed, standing by the bed with a look of guilt and defiance all at once. The pain in my chest nearly eclipsed the pain in my body. I felt my knees buckle. "I'm in labor, Daniel," I whispered. "Our baby is coming, and this is where you are?" His mouth opened, closed, searching for excuses. I didn't wait to hear them. A fresh contraction ripped through me and I gasped, bracing myself against the wall. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to stand. "I'm going to the hospital," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "Don't bother coming." I turned and walked away, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the elevator, tears blurred everything. The world outside felt colder now, lonelier. But beneath the heartbreak, something else sparked. A quiet, simmering rage. As I drove toward the hospital, one thought burned in my mind. If he could betray me now, of all times, then I needed to know just how deep his lies went. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 32 years old, a former elementary school teacher turned full-time homemaker when my husband, Daniel, convinced me that raising our child would be the most important job I could ever have. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind where everybody knew your name and your business. My parents ran a modest hardware store, and they worked side by side for 30 years. They weren't rich, but they had what mattered: trust, loyalty, and a bond I thought could never be broken. When I met Daniel 8 years ago at a friend's wedding, he was charming, confident, and everything I thought I wanted. He worked in real estate, wore sharp suits, and had a way of making every room feel warmer when he walked in. I was smitten. Within a year, we were married. At first, life felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. We bought a small but cozy home in a quiet suburb just outside of Columbus. He promised we'd build a life together, travel, raise kids, grow old hand in hand. For a while, I believed him completely. But little by little, cracks began to form. Daniel started working late more often, sometimes disappearing for entire weekends on business trips. He was still affectionate, still brought me flowers on occasion, but something in his eyes had changed. When I became pregnant, I thought it might bring us closer. He seemed excited, at least at first, shopping for baby clothes, talking about names, even painting the nursery a soft shade of yellow. But somewhere along the way, his attention drifted again. I didn't complain. I told myself that maybe he was stressed about money, or maybe he just needed space. I tried to be the perfect wife, cooking his favorite meals, keeping the house spotless, smiling even when my feet were swollen and my back ached from carrying our child. Yet deep down, I knew I was holding on to the memory of a man who might not exist anymore. And still, I stayed. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the belief that I could somehow fix what was broken. Now, lying in that hospital bed with contractions racking my body, all I could think about was how I'd ended up here, alone, abandoned, and more unsure of my marriage than ever. But something inside me was shifting, a quiet strength that whispered, "You can't go back to the woman you were before tonight." The nurses bustled around me, checking monitors and adjusting IV lines. I tried to focus on my breathing, but my mind kept drifting back to that hotel hallway, to Daniel's startled face and the woman behind him. A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't change the fact that when I needed him most, he chose someone else. That betrayal was now etched into me as deeply as the life I was about to bring into the world. Growing up, my mother used to tell me I was stubborn in the ways that mattered. She said it when I fought to join the boys' baseball team in 5th grade, and again when I insisted on paying my way through college with part-time jobs. I never saw that stubbornness as strength until now. Between contractions, I thought about the years I'd spent pouring myself into our marriage. I'd let go of my career, my financial independence, and even parts of my personality to make Daniel happy. I'd laughed off his mood swings, overlooked his late nights, and silenced my own suspicions, because I wanted so badly to believe in us. But tonight had stripped away the illusions. There was no us anymore. Just me, our baby, and the choices I had to make from here on out. I looked out the hospital window at the city lights shimmering in the distance. Somewhere out there, Daniel was probably scrambling to come up with a story, a way to smooth this over. Maybe he'd show up here with flowers, maybe he'd cry and beg for forgiveness. But even if he did, something fundamental had changed. The Emma who had walked into that hotel was gone. The Emma lying here now was someone else, someone who had been pushed to the edge and was starting to see her own worth. The nurse returned, smiling gently. "You're doing great, Emma. Just keep breathing. You're stronger than you think." Her words lodged in my chest, almost bringing tears. Maybe she meant it in the physical sense, but I felt it differently. I was stronger than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. As another contraction began to build, I gripped the rails of the bed, closing my eyes. This wasn't just the birth of my child, it was the birth of a new version of me. And whether Daniel liked it or not, that woman wasn't going to live in his shadow anymore. St. Mary's Hospital wasn't the fanciest in Columbus, but it was clean, quiet, and had a maternity ward that was known for treating its patients like family. I'd toured the place 2 months ago with Daniel, back when I thought he'd be by my side for every contraction. Now, the warm beige walls and the faint scent of antiseptic felt both comforting and lonely. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their soft-soled shoes whispering against the tile floors, the distant beeping of monitors mixed with the occasional newborn cry, a sound that should have filled me with joy, but instead tightened the ache in my chest. My room overlooked the parking lot, where a light drizzle misted the windshields of scattered cars. I could see the reflection of the city's glow on the wet pavement, a reminder that life outside these walls was still moving, unaware of the storm inside me. Nurse Linda, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stayed close. "First baby?" she asked, between checking my vitals. I nodded. "First, and probably last," she chuckled softly. "We'll see. You'd be surprised how quickly you forget the hard parts." Her easy confidence grounded me for a moment, pulling me away from the endless loop of images in my mind, the hotel room, the brunette, Daniel's expression. But the quiet moments between contractions were dangerous. That's when my thoughts came roaring back. Through the partially open door, I caught glimpses of the nurses' station, decorated with baby-themed posters and a small bulletin board filled with photos of staff with their own children. There was a sense of community here, one I hadn't felt in my own home for a long time. Every so often, I heard a husband's voice down the hall, low and encouraging, or the sound of someone laughing in relief when a baby's first cry filled the air. It was bittersweet, knowing I wouldn't have that moment with Daniel by my side. Instead, the chair next to my bed sat empty, a hospital-issued blanket folded neatly over the armrest. My overnight bag was tucked beside it, its zipper half open from when I'd thrown it into the car. When the doctor came in to check my progress, I forced myself to focus on his calm tone, his professional assurances. "You're at 6 centimeters, Emma. Things are moving along nicely. We'll have a baby here soon." I managed to smile, but inside I was bracing for more than just childbirth. I knew this night wasn't just about bringing a new life into the world. It was the night my old life was ending. Outside my door, I heard the faint squeak of shoes approaching, a shadow passing across the frosted glass, and my heart clenched at the possibility of who it might be. The door creaked open slowly, and for a heartbeat, I thought it might be Daniel. My stomach tightened, not from the contraction this time, but from a swirl of dread and unwanted hope. But it wasn't him. It was my neighbor, Sarah Miller, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, cheeks flushed from the cold night air. She clutched her phone in one hand and a small tote bag in the other. "Emma," she said softly, stepping inside, I saw your car in the hospital lot. I figured you'd be here." Relief washed over me, mixed with an odd embarrassment. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She hesitated, then placed the tote bag on the chair. "I know tonight probably isn't the time for explanations, but you need to know something. I was the one who texted you about the Westbrook Hotel." I blinked at her, my mind trying to catch up. "That was you?" She nodded. "I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't keep watching him sneak around. I've seen him there before, Emma, more than once." Her words hit harder than the contractions. "How long?" I asked. Sarah bit her lip. "Months. Maybe longer. I didn't know how to tell you without hurting you, but when I heard from one of my cousins, she works at the hotel, that he was there tonight, I couldn't stay quiet." The room seemed to shrink around me. The quiet hum of the hospital machines grew louder, almost suffocating. I felt anger flare again, but this time it wasn't just at Daniel. It was at myself, for ignoring the signs. Before I could respond, another contraction surged through me. I gripped the rails, breathing hard. Sarah stepped forward, holding my hand without asking. "You're not alone, Emma," she said firmly. "Not tonight, not anymore." Her presence was grounding in a way I didn't expect. She wasn't family, not even my closest friend, but in this moment, she was exactly who I needed, someone who knew the truth and didn't look away. When the contraction passed, I leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. "Thank you," I whispered. She gave my hand a squeeze, then glanced toward the door. "Do you want me to stay if he shows up?" I thought about it, then nodded. "Yes, I don't want to face him alone." As she settled into the chair, I realized the empty space beside my bed didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The ache in my heart was still there, but a new feeling, small but steady, had begun to take root. Somewhere between the pain and betrayal, I could feel the faint beginnings of strength, and I knew this night would not break me. Daniel Carter wasn't always the man I saw in that hotel doorway. Or maybe he was, and I'd just been too blinded by love to see him clearly. When I met him, he had the kind of confidence that made people lean in. He could sell a house in under a week, not because it was perfect, but because he made you believe it was. His words were smooth, his smile easy, and his attention, when he gave it, felt like sunlight. In the early years of our marriage, he was attentive, even doting. He'd surprise me with weekend getaways, bring home little gifts, and tell me I was the reason he worked so hard. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But somewhere around our 5th anniversary, things shifted. He started taking more business trips, often with little notice. His phone became glued to his hand, the screen tilted away from me. When I'd ask about his day, his answers grew shorter, less interested. There were other changes too, subtle at first. A new cologne I didn't recognize, shirts I'd never seen before appearing in the laundry, an expensive watch that a client had given him as thanks. Whenever I questioned him, he'd smile, brush it off, and somehow make me feel like I was being unreasonable. "Emma, you've been cooped up at home too much," he'd say. "You're overthinking things." And I'd drop it, because the alternative, believing he could betray me, was too painful to face. Daniel had a talent for playing the part of the devoted husband in public. At neighborhood barbecues, he'd stand beside me with his arm around my waist, telling stories that made people laugh. At family gatherings, he'd bring my mom her favorite pie and offer to fix things around her house. People adored him. But behind closed doors, the warmth would fade. He'd retreat into his phone or his laptop, claiming he was catching up on work. We slept in the same bed, but there were nights when he felt like a stranger lying inches away. And yet, I stayed. I told myself every marriage had rough patches. I convinced myself that his distance was temporary. I clung to the good memories like a lifeline, ignoring the cracks widening beneath my feet. Seeing him at the Westbrook Hotel shattered all of that. The truth wasn't a sudden blow. It was the final piece clicking into place, the confirmation of every suspicion I'd buried. And now, as the contractions came faster, I knew I wasn't just fighting for my baby's arrival. I was fighting to take back the pieces of myself he'd stolen. Daniel's talent for deception wasn't just in what he said, it was in how he made you feel while he was saying it. He had this way of locking eyes, nodding at just the right moments, sprinkling in a laugh or a sigh that made you believe his story was genuine. That skill, I realized, had probably served him just as well in his affairs as it had in his career. I wondered how many women had stood in front of him, just like me, convinced they were the only one he truly cared about. Sarah's words from earlier in the night echoed in my mind. "I've seen him there before, Emma. More than once." The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the repetition, the deliberate choices he'd made over and over again. I thought back to the late nights when he'd come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, or the way his mood would suddenly lift after checking a text he wouldn't let me see. I remembered the half-truths, the changed stories, the excuses so rehearsed they rolled off his tongue like lines from a script. And then there was the money. We weren't struggling, but I'd noticed withdrawals from our joint account that didn't line up with our bills. When I asked, he said they were for client dinners or last-minute travel expenses. I wanted to dig deeper, but every time I did, he'd turn the spotlight back on me, making me feel paranoid, needy, even ungrateful. Daniel thrived on control. He liked being the one with all the answers, the one who set the narrative. As long as I stayed in the dark, he could keep living the double life he'd built. But that night at the hospital, something shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at him through the lens of love or longing. I was seeing him as he truly was, a man who had chosen himself, his ego, and his pleasures over the family we were supposed to be building. I didn't know yet how far his lies went or what else I might uncover. But I did know this: the man I thought I married no longer existed, and the man standing in his place was not someone I could trust with my future or my child's. And deep down, a dangerous thought was beginning to take shape. Maybe it wasn't enough just to leave him. Maybe I needed to make sure he could never hurt us again. It was just after 9 a.m. when I finally held my daughter in my arms. Her tiny fingers curled instinctively around mine, her soft cry melting the ache in my body for a moment. The room was quiet except for the gentle cooing of the nurse, who was wrapping her in a warm blanket. I wanted that to be the only thing I remembered from this morning. But the moment was shattered by the sound of the door swinging open. Daniel walked in. His hair was slicked back, and he wore a crisp button-down shirt that smelled faintly of cologne. Not the one I'd bought him, but the same one I'd smelled in the hotel hallway. His smile was wide, rehearsed, like a man walking into a meeting, not a delivery room. "Emma," he said, his voice full of forced warmth. "I came as soon as I could." Sarah, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, stood up and crossed her arms. "Really? You had 9 hours?" Daniel's jaw tightened, but he ignored her. He stepped toward me, eyes flicking to the baby. "She's beautiful, just like her mother." I looked at him, searching for any sign of guilt. There was none. Only the smooth mask he'd perfected over years of lying. "Where were you, Daniel?" My voice was steady, though my heart pounded. He hesitated just long enough for Sarah to speak. "She knows, Daniel. She knows where you were last night." A flicker of panic flashed across his face, quickly replaced by indignation. "Sarah, this is none of your business." "You made it my business," she shot back, "when you left your wife alone in labor to be with another woman." The nurse, sensing the tension, glanced at me. "Do you want me to?" "No," I said firmly. "Let him stay. Let him hear this." Daniel's voice rose. "Emma, she's lying." "You know I'd never." I cut him off. "Don't. I saw you, Daniel. I saw her. Room 512, Westbrook Hotel." The room went still. Even the baby seemed to sense the shift, her small face scrunching as if the air had turned heavier. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it before showing me the screen. A photo. Clear as day. Daniel and the brunette, walking into the hotel together last month. Daniel's face drained of color, and for the first time his charm faltered. Daniel took a step back, his eyes darting between me and Sarah like a cornered animal. "That photo doesn't mean anything," he said quickly. "It's taken out of context." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Out of context? You were walking into a hotel with another woman the night I went to labor. What's the context, Daniel? A business meeting?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "Emma, you've just given birth, you're exhausted, you're not thinking clearly." I felt a surge of heat in my chest. Not from the pain of labor, but from rage. "I've never thought more clearly in my life," I said. Sarah stepped closer, her voice low but sharp. "And don't you dare try to gaslight her right now. She deserves the truth." The nurse lingered near the door, clearly uncomfortable, but I could see in her eyes that she understood this wasn't just a lover's quarrel, it was a reckoning. Daniel's tone shifted, growing colder. "Fine. You want the truth? She doesn't mean anything to me. It was just a distraction." I blinked at him, stunned by how casually he dismissed it. "A distraction? Our marriage? Our baby?" He shrugged slightly, as if the weight of what he'd done barely registered. "You've been so focused on the pregnancy. I felt left out." The words were like a slap. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You left yourself out, Daniel. And now, you've left us." Sarah handed me the phone again, scrolling through more photos. Different nights, different outfits, same woman. "He's been doing this for a while, Emma," she said softly. I looked at him one last time, searching for any sign of the man I thought I knew. There was nothing, just a stranger wearing my husband's face. "You need to leave," I said finally. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "This is my child too." "Not tonight," I said, my voice firm. "Not until I decide if you deserve to be in her life." He hesitated, then turned toward the door, muttering something under his breath. When it closed behind him, the silence in the room was almost deafening. Sarah moved closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing." I looked down at my daughter, her tiny chest rising and falling. In that moment, I made a silent promise. She would never grow up thinking this was what love looked like. And as I held her tighter, I knew this public unraveling of Daniel's lies was only the beginning. The hours after Daniel left were the longest of my life. The adrenaline that had kept me steady during labor drained away, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of deep breathing could ease. The hospital room was dim, the blinds drawn against the gray morning light. My daughter slept in the bassinet beside me, her tiny breaths a soft rhythm that contrasted sharply with the chaos in my mind. I should have been basking in joy, memorizing every detail of her face, her scent, her soft little sighs. Instead, I lay there with tears sliding silently into my hair, feeling as though my entire life had collapsed in the span of a single night. Sarah had gone home to grab me a change of clothes and promised to return later. The nurses came and went, their smiles kind but distant, careful not to intrude on the storm they could sense, but not fully understand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel in that hotel doorway, bare skin, guilty eyes, and the woman behind him, looking at me without shame. My chest tightened, my hands curling into fists. I thought about all the times I'd defended him to friends when they hinted something might be off. The times I'd told myself I was lucky to have him. The years I'd built my life around a man who couldn't even show up for the birth of his child. By midday, the weight of it all felt unbearable. I slipped my phone from the side table and scrolled through old photos, vacations, anniversaries, the day we bought the house. Every smile now looked false, every embrace staged. I found myself wondering if any of it had been real, or if I'd just been living in the shadow of a performance. The betrayal wasn't just in his actions last night, it was in the realization that my marriage had been dying for a long time, and I hadn't wanted to see it. A nurse entered quietly to check on me. "How are you feeling, Emma?" she asked gently. I swallowed hard, like I don't know who I am anymore. She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You're a mother. That's who you are now. And that's enough to start over." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure if I believed her. Because right then, all I could feel was the crushing weight of being abandoned, and I didn't know how to stand back up. By the second night in the hospital, the exhaustion had seeped into my bones. My body ached from labor, but my heart carried a heavier pain. Every sound in the hallway made me tense, half expecting Daniel to reappear with flowers and apologies I didn't want to hear. When Sarah returned, she brought my favorite sweatshirt and a small bag of toiletries. She helped me into fresh clothes, then sat beside me, her presence steady and unintrusive. "You don't have to talk," she said quietly, "but if you do, I'm here." The words unlocked something in me. The tears I'd been holding back all day spilled over, and I told her everything, how I'd ignored the late nights, the sudden trips, the hidden bank withdrawals. How I'd convinced myself the man I loved was still there, even when the proof of his absence was all around me. Sarah listened without judgment, her hand resting over mine. "You've been through hell," she said when I finally fell silent, "but you're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her, but all I could feel was the gnawing question. If he could do this to me now, when I was carrying his child, what else was he capable of? Later that night, alone again, I fed my daughter in the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Her tiny fingers brushed against my skin, and for a moment the noise in my head quieted. She didn't know about betrayal or heartbreak. All she knew was that I was her mother, and she needed me. I realized then that my life wasn't just mine anymore. It was tied to hers. And if I stayed in this place of despair, I'd be teaching her that it was okay to accept less than she deserved. The thought terrified me. It also sparked something small but fierce deep inside. I wasn't ready to stand tall yet, but maybe, just maybe, I could start to crawl out of this darkness. Because if I didn't, the woman Daniel had tried to break would be gone forever, and I wasn't ready to let him win. 2 days after I was discharged from the hospital, I returned home with my daughter in my arms and Sarah by my side. The house felt colder than I remembered, as if the walls themselves knew what had happened. I hadn't heard from Daniel since the confrontation in the hospital. Part of me hoped he'd stay gone. Another part feared what would happen when he inevitably returned. While Sarah helped me settle the baby into her crib, I went to the kitchen to make tea. That's when I noticed something strange, an envelope taped under the drawer of the coffee table in the living room. Curiosity outweighed caution. I pulled it free, the tape giving way with a soft tear. Inside were a series of folded documents and several receipts. The first page made my stomach lurch. A bank statement from an account I didn't recognize, showing withdrawals and deposits that didn't match anything from our shared finances. My hands shook as I flipped through the rest. There were hotel receipts. Westbrook, yes, but also other hotels in different cities. Plane tickets. Jewelry purchases I'd never received. At the bottom of the stack was the most damning piece. A signed contract in Daniel's name, showing he had transferred a large sum of money, almost our entire savings, into a joint investment with someone named Vanessa Brooks, the same name that had appeared on one of the hotel receipts. The betrayal suddenly took on a sharper edge. This wasn't just an affair. This was a financial entanglement, a deliberate attempt to move our money out of reach. Sarah walked in, catching the look on my face. "Emma, what is it?" I handed her the papers. She scanned them quickly, her expression hardening. "He's not just cheating, Emma. He's stealing from you." The truth hit me like a second labor. Sudden, intense, unavoidable. I'd been so focused on the emotional wound that I hadn't seen the practical one. Daniel was trying to cut me out of my own future. Sarah placed a hand on my shoulder. "You need a lawyer, today." And in that moment, my grief began to shift into something sharper, a need for justice and maybe even revenge. By that afternoon, I was sitting in the office of Laura Jenkins, a family attorney recommended by Sarah's cousin. Laura was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who had seen every kind of marital disaster. I laid the documents on her desk, explaining how I'd found them. She leafed through each page, her expression growing more serious with every passing minute. "This isn't just infidelity," she said finally. "This is marital fraud. In Ohio, moving marital assets into a separate account without your knowledge, especially in connection with an affair, is grounds for both divorce and criminal charges." The words criminal charges made my pulse quicken. I'd been picturing Daniel losing the house, maybe paying child support, but prison? That was a different kind of justice. Laura leaned forward. "We can freeze that account today if you want. It'll stop him from moving any more money, but you need to be ready. Once we do this, it's war." I looked down at my daughter, asleep in her carrier by my feet. She deserved a future free from this man's shadow. I deserved that too. "Do it," I said. My voice didn't even shake. Laura smiled faintly, then began making calls. Within an hour, the wheels were in motion. Account frozen, paperwork drafted, court date pending. When I left her office, the winter air felt sharper, cleaner. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was taking action. Back at home, Sarah hugged me tightly. "Proud of you," she said. But I wasn't done. Because if Daniel thought he could betray me in private and walk away untouched in public, he was about to learn how wrong he was. And as I watched my daughter sleeping peacefully that night, I made another silent promise. I would make sure the world knew exactly who Daniel Carter really was. 2 weeks after meeting with Laura, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me in the mirror. My skin still showed the pale traces of sleepless nights, but there was something new in my eyes, a steadiness, a resolve that hadn't been there before. I'd started small. Each morning I'd make my bed, shower, and put on clothes that weren't just pajamas. I got back into light exercise, walking the neighborhood with my daughter in her stroller. It was as if every step I took outside the house was reclaiming a little more of the life I'd lost. Sarah noticed the change too. "You're starting to stand taller," she said one afternoon as we sipped tea in my kitchen. "Like you've remembered you're more than what he tried to make you." The paperwork for the divorce and fraud charges had been filed, and Daniel had been served. He'd called twice, left one voicemail that I didn't bother to listen to. Laura advised me to keep all communication through her office. It was liberating not to hear his voice. I also opened a new bank account in my name only. The first deposit I made felt symbolic, money I'd earned tutoring online for just a week, but it was mine. And then there was my appearance. Not for Daniel, not for anyone else, but for me. I booked a haircut, trimming away the tired ends that had been neglected during pregnancy. I bought a deep blue dress that made my eyes look sharper, my shoulders straighter. When I caught my reflection that day, I realized this wasn't just about looking different. It was about feeling different, about stepping into the role of a woman who had survived something that could have broken her. The final shift came when Laura called to tell me the judge had approved a temporary restraining order against Daniel, accessing any joint property until the trial. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt in control. And I knew that control wasn't something I'd ever give back to him again. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was in the way I spoke, the way I carried myself. At the grocery store, I looked people in the eye instead of avoiding their gaze. At the pediatrician's office, I asked direct questions without second-guessing myself. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by with a surprise. "You're coming with me," she said, handing me a garment bag. Inside was a sleek black blazer, tailored perfectly. "What's this for?" I asked. "You have a meeting tomorrow with Laura and the financial investigator," she reminded me. "You're walking in there as the woman who's going to take back everything he tried to steal." The next day, I did just that. Sitting in that conference room, I didn't feel like the abandoned wife from the hospital. I felt like someone who could win. The investigator laid out the timeline of Daniel's transactions, the evidence of his affair, and the potential charges. Hearing it all laid out so clearly gave me a rush of vindication. Later that week, I received an invitation to a charity gala from one of Laura's contacts. "A networking opportunity," she said, "to connect with people who could support my case and perhaps offer me new professional avenues." I almost declined, thinking it wasn't my world anymore. But then I remembered the blue dress hanging in my closet. That night at the gala, I walked in with Sarah on one side and Laura on the other. Heads turned, not because of scandal, but because I exuded something I hadn't in years: confidence. I laughed easily, spoke about my tutoring work, and even made tentative plans to expand it into a small business. As I drove home, my daughter asleep in the back seat, I realized this was more than a comeback. This was the beginning of a life that was truly mine. And the best part was knowing Daniel would have to watch every step of my rise while his own world slowly crumbled. The charity gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Franklin Hotel, a place so polished it felt like every chandelier and polished marble floor was watching you. I'd been there before, years ago, on Daniel's arm. Back then, I'd been the supportive wife, smiling in the background while he charmed the room. This time, I walked in alone. Well, not entirely alone. Sarah and Laura flanked me like my own personal guard. People noticed, whispers floated through the air, but I kept my chin high. The deep blue dress I'd chosen clung in all the right places, the tailored blazer draped over my shoulders like armor. Tonight, I wasn't here to hide. I was here to be seen. Halfway through the evening, I spotted him. Daniel stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, dressed in his usual tailored suit. Vanessa, the brunette from the hotel, was draped on his arm, her smile too wide to be real. He saw me before I reached him. His eyes widened just slightly, enough for me to know he hadn't expected me to show up. "Emma," he said, his voice low and carefully neutral. "Daniel." I kept my tone cool. "Enjoying the evening?" Before he could answer, Laura stepped forward, greeting him with the crisp professionalism of someone who'd just frozen his assets. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I hope you're ready for your deposition next week." Vanessa's smile faltered. "What is she talking about?" she asked, looking up at him. I didn't give him a chance to answer. "She's talking about the charges, Vanessa. Fraud, asset theft. You might want to get your own lawyer." Around us, the nearby conversations began to quiet. Eyes were turning toward us, curious, hungry for scandal. Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't the place." "Oh, I think it's the perfect place," I said, my voice steady but carrying. "After all, you never minded making a scene when it benefited you." Vanessa took a step back, her arm slipping from his. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. For the first time since that night in the hospital, I felt the balance shift. The power wasn't his anymore. It was mine. Daniel's voice dropped to a hiss. "You're embarrassing yourself." I tilted my head slightly. "No, Daniel, I'm telling the truth, and you're the one embarrassed. It's just finally public." Laura pulled out her phone. "By the way," she said loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "the court order freezing your accounts was finalized this morning. You won't be moving any money anywhere until the trial." Gasps rippled through the small circle of onlookers. Vanessa stepped away completely now, her expression shifting from annoyance to outright fear. "You told me this was handled," she said to him, voice sharp. "It would have been," he muttered, glaring at me, "if you hadn't gone digging." I took a step closer, my voice clear and unwavering. "You mean if I had stayed quiet? If I'd let you drain our savings, keep lying, and play house with your mistress while I raised our child alone? But I'm not that woman anymore." The room felt electric, the air thick with the weight of everyone listening. I didn't care. Let them all hear. Laura handed me a small folder, which I opened just enough for Daniel to see the top page. A copy of the evidence file, every receipt, transfer, and photo neatly documented. "Consider this a preview," I said. "The rest will come out in court." Vanessa turned to leave, but not before throwing Daniel a look that could cut glass. The whispers followed her across the ballroom. Daniel's composure cracked. "You think you've won? This isn't over, Emma." I met his gaze, unflinching. "It is for you." With that, I turned and walked away, Laura and Sarah beside me. The noise of the gala swelled again, but I felt lighter, like I'd set down a weight I'd been carrying for far too long. Outside, the cold night air hit my skin, fresh and bracing. I glanced up at the stars, thinking of my daughter at home, safe and sleeping. Daniel might still have to face the court, but tonight, in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already in, and I had won. 2 months after the gala, the courtroom was quiet except for the shuffle of papers and the low murmur of voices. I sat at the plaintiff's table, Laura beside me, my daughter sleeping soundly in her stroller. Daniel sat across from us, looking thinner, his once perfect suit hanging just a little looser on his frame. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The proceedings moved quickly. Laura presented the evidence we'd gathered, the fraudulent transfers, the hotel receipts, the testimony from Sarah and others who'd witnessed his repeated absences. Daniel's attorney tried to paint the picture of a man who had simply made poor choices, but the judge's expression remained unmoved. By the end of the day, the ruling was clear. I was granted full custody of my daughter, sole ownership of the house, and a court order requiring Daniel to repay the stolen funds, with interest. More importantly, the judge referred the fraud charges to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. As the gavel came down, I felt a rush of relief so strong I had to grip the edge of the table. Justice wasn't just an idea anymore, it was real, and it was mine. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I hadn't planned to speak, but when one asked, "Emma, what do you want other women to know from your story?" I paused. "That no matter how dark it gets," I said, "you are stronger than you think. You don't have to stay with someone who breaks you, and when you stand up for yourself, you're standing up for every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet." Sarah squeezed my arm, pride shining in her eyes. That night, at home, I tucked my daughter into her crib and stood watching her for a long time. The house felt different now, not haunted, but full of possibility. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. Spring came early that year, painting the town in soft pink blossoms and golden light. I had won, not just in court, but in life. The tutoring business I'd started had grown into something steady, bringing in enough income to cover our needs and give us comfort. Every dollar I earned carried the weight of my freedom. Daniel, on the other hand, was out of the picture in every way that mattered. The district attorney had pursued the fraud case, and the verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, ordered to repay every cent he'd stolen from me. The man who had once strutted through every room like he owned it now faced bars instead of boardrooms. I didn't go to his sentencing. I didn't need to. Justice wasn't in watching him be led away. It was in knowing that my daughter would grow up without his shadow hanging over her life. One warm evening, Sarah came over for dinner. We sat on the porch, watching my daughter toddle through the grass, giggling as she chased petals drifting from the cherry tree. "You've come so far," Sarah said softly. I smiled. "We both have." I thought of the woman I'd been that night in the hospital, shaking, abandoned, unsure if I could take one more step forward. That woman had been broken, yes, but she had risen. And now, standing in the fading light of a spring evening, I felt unshakable. I lifted my daughter into my arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. She leaned her head against my shoulder, safe, loved, and free. "We're going to be just fine," I whispered to her. "In fact, we already are." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew this wasn't just the end of a chapter. It was the start of the life we truly deserved. Dear friend, life has a way of testing us in the moments we least expect. I once thought strength meant holding on no matter the cost, but I've learned that true strength often means letting go of the lies, of the people who hurt us, and of the version of ourselves that believed we weren't enough without them. The night I went into labor alone, I thought my world was ending. In truth, it was just beginning. Pain has a strange way of carving out space inside you, space that can be filled with resilience, clarity, and a fierce kind of peace. The Stoics remind us, we cannot control what others do, only how we choose to respond. And that night, I chose to rise. Justice came, not because I waited for it, but because I pursued it. I stopped asking why me, and started asking what now. That shift changed everything. I stopped being a bystander in my own life and became its author. If you're in a dark season right now, hear me. You are not powerless. The betrayal, the loss, the heartbreak, they are not the end of your story. They are the fire that can forge you into someone you never thought you could be. Stand tall, protect your peace, and remember, no one can take your worth unless you hand it to them. My friend, choose courage over comfort, truth over illusion, and self-respect over approval. Life will meet you on the other side of that choice, and it will be better than you imagined. Keep going. You're stronger than you think. If this story touched you, give it a like, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe so we can keep walking this journey together. Thank you for being here. You are part of this story now.